for inviting me to be a part of this. It's truly an honor. Father Rother is a real hero to us in my organization. I'm executive director of an organization called the Friends of San Lucas. And the Friends of San Lucas grow out of the ministry of a priest from the New Ulm Diocese of Minnesota who went to San Lucas Toloman, which is just down the shore from Santiago Atitlan. He went there in 1963, and he spent the next 50 years of his life doing ministry among the people of San Lucas Toloman. The people of San Lucas Toloman are Cachiquel Mayan, and the people in Santiago Atitlan are Stutuio. And Father Rother and Father Greg were great colleagues during the time that they were there together. And Father Greg always spoke in incredibly glowing terms of the work of Father Rother and all that he did there. They both lived through some very, very turbulent times, and it cost Father Rother his life. Father Greg was occasionally on death lists as well, and had to be very careful about what he did and who he did it with. But he did manage to survive the Civil War, the 36 years of the Civil War, and lived out his ministry and died in 2012. In 2012, an organization was formed, the Friends of San Lucas, to carry on his work. And Father Greg, in that time, as Father Rother had in his time, started many different ministries, realizing that parish ministry was not going to be enough to serve the needs of the people. Father Greg started a housing program, a coffee program, a women's center, a visitors program, a school, and a clinic. All of those meant to respond to the expressed felt need of the people in Santiago and in San Lucas and in the surrounding area. The reality is those towns really support communities that spread out. So in the case of San Lucas Toloman, we actually work in 22 surrounding communities to San Lucas. I want to take a second just to kind of step back and ask a question about what is sort of the dominant historical context of the work that we're doing there. It was the work that Father Rother was doing, and it's the work that Father Greg was doing, and it's the work that the Friends of San Lucas continues to do. Because it's really been clear to me in the time that I've been doing this work that where we are in that part of Guatemala as a culture makes a huge difference in terms of how we do the work that we do. And just to back up for just a second, the conquistadors, when they came to that part of the world, established a system called the encomienda system. The encomienda system was essentially large tracts of land were granted to conquistadors and other Spanish rulers in exchange for the pacification of the people. And so it really became an enslaved population in many ways. And these people were moved onto plantations and were forced to do the work for the owners of the plantations or the fincas. And that system existed for hundreds of years. It morphed into a finca system or a plantation system. But people would still live on the plantations, were forced to work extraordinary hours for very little pay. It's not uncommon to find people in their 50s and 60s who went to work when they were 4 or 5 years old, had never been to school, cannot read or write, because they lived their entire life on the plantation, on the finca. And about 20 or 25 years ago, for a number of different reasons, fincas started to come up for sale. And so Father Greg would come back to the United States, raise money, and try and find the funds to buy that land and then give it back to the people. Because if the finca was sold out from underneath the workers, they literally had no place to go. And so Father Greg did that and started a number of communities that were born out of the workers of the fincas in that area. They also were born out of natural disasters, mudslides, and other things that occurred there, so that these communities really came together in the last 15 or 20 years. They were also affected, Fincas were also affected by a drop in the price of coffee in the early 2000s, which caused some of them to go bankrupt. And so what we're living in now is what I call the sort of post-Finca, post-Patron era. The Patron, the head of the Finca, was really the person that made all the major decisions that affected the lives of the workers. And occasionally patrons were benevolent, quite often they weren't. They were harsh masters. And the best analogy I can come up with is that it's a little bit like post-Civil War South in the United States, where you had people who had lived on plantations and been enslaved for hundreds of years and were suddenly faced with the prospects of freedom, but also had absolutely no preparation for what that meant and how to deal with that. And so in the Reconstruction in the South, you had a number of people that would just end up back on plantations, essentially indentured servants to the plantation owners. And you also get that tendency in Guatemala as well, where the people who now have freedom and have a little bit of land, but haven't been really prepared to work in a way that gives them a sense of responsibility and helps them understand all the things that need to happen in a very complex life. There are no longer patrons. And so one of the things that we struggle with in our work is how to make sure that A, we don't become the next patron, the next organization that simply makes decisions on behalf of people, and number two, that we really try and help develop the skills of the folks there so that they can live into a future that they're able to determine themselves. And that's really one of the big challenges that we have. So if there's no longer a patron, who do you look to for leadership? And you know, there's absolutely fantastic leadership within those communities. It's just a matter of developing it and having people learn to work within those things. Paul, in the materials that he sent out, talked about what difference does the beatification of Father Rother mean? What difference does it make? And I think it makes a huge difference for a number of reasons. Some of you may remember in 2012 there was a race walker from Guatemala who won the silver medal in one of the Olympic race walking events. We happened to be there when he won that. We were in a restaurant in Santiago, and the place went absolutely crazy. And it was the first time a Guatemalan had ever won an Olympic medal. You know, and it was just an amazing story. But it was a huge embarrassment for the government because the man was indigenous. And as a couple of people have alluded to tonight, the culture is extraordinarily racist. And racist from the Ladino descendants of Spanish against the indigenous people. And so the government had to, it was this huge embarrassment. It's like, well, it was great, Guatemalan won the medal, and he was an indigenous person. It's sort of like when Rigoberto Menchú won the Nobel Peace Prize, you know, again, couldn't it have been a Ladino? And so it really pointed out the racist structure of the culture, and it was an embarrassment along the lines of when Jesse Owens won all the gold medals in the Berlin Olympics. Father Rother being beatified raises the same kind of issue because Father Rother served the people of Santiago Atitlan. He served the Tzotzil people. He served the indigenous people. And you cannot talk about him without talking about the things that he did with respect to that. And as people mentioned, the translation of the Bible and his other work. And one of the things that he did that was amazing, whenever I take groups, had the chance to lead groups to San Lucas, we always do a pilgrimage to Santiago. And we visit the church there, and we visit the room where Father Rother was martyred, which is now a chapel. In the church itself, Father Rother had commissioned a new altarpiece to be carved by by two of the carvers who lived in Santiago. And in that altarpiece are incorporated all kinds of traditional symbols of traditional Mayan religion. Father Rother and Father Greg were great believers in the syncretistic development and the syncretistic relationship between traditional Mayan spirituality and Catholicism. And so you will find those symbols carved into the altarpiece, and it's a fascinating study. In addition to that, in the front of the altar, those of you who've been there may have seen this, there's a small tile, just a regular floor tile, that if you look at it closely, you realize it can be removed, it's loose. And underneath that tile is a hole, which the Tsutsuil Mayans believe is the navel of the universe. So you will occasionally see, usually women kneeling around that area praying fervently, and you wonder, it's sort of an odd place to pray until you realize that's what they're praying to. Father Rother was extraordinarily respectful and encouraging of the ways that Catholic spirituality and Mayan spirituality could work together. And that was certainly one of his legacies. I think finally, the whole question of what the beatification means is important to ask, and it's extraordinarily important for the development of the Catholic Church in that area, and so and also in the United States, I think, with our own sense of honor for what Father Rother has done. But I think the real question then becomes, when will we beatify an indigenous person? Because I think that the depth of commitment and the depth of love and the depth of care that the Mayan people have for their country and for their history is incredibly profound. And Guatemala has the largest percentage of indigenous population in the Western Hemisphere at 60%. And for them to be recognized in things like Roberto Menchu getting the Nobel Peace Prize, the person who won the Olympic medal, etc., will only further be helped with the beatification of Father Rother and potentially his canonization, and as well as hopefully at some point the beatification of an indigenous person. So thank you. I can't hear anything, so I will need to whomever called me to call me back. Thanks.